Hi, my name is Enx Eeden. I am an author of Lenape and Iroquois Descent, and this is my presentation on Two-Spirit traditions, similar to the name of my book. The point of having this program today is to rehabilitate and reintegrate some very important cultural pieces that are pan-Indian. They are relevant to Native Americans of many different tribes, but in particular for the Lenape, who have gone through many physical and paper genocides. So we really need to bring our etiquette back, and some of that has to do with the LGBTQ people of our nation. The two spirits are the indigiqueer. So a little bit about me. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. And I was born in Philadelphia, so I call this place my home. I have traveled immensely by foot, by car, by trail, and I still keep coming back home because this is a very important story to share, and it's also where we get to see our family become even bigger. So thank you for being a part of that today. I'll get to sing to you a little bit and tell you a little bit more about who the two spirits are and what we mean. So cultivating two spirits, keeping indigiqueer traditions alive is part of the education that I do on behalf of the organization that I founded called Two Spirits of Pennsylvania. And that was originated to bring some of us together with shared identity, be it from whichever tribe, given that there is no real tribe of two spirits. There are many tribes that have two spirit people, and now part of our journey is to be able to find each other again and bring back our words, bring back our languages, bring back our songs and our practices. So I'm very excited to share that with all of you today. I'm going to read to you a little bit to give you a bit of an introduction. So, who are Two-Spirit or indigiqueer people? Two-Spirit is a band-aid term covering an umbrella of Native queer identities. It was coined in 1990 by tribal leaders at a Manitoba Indigenous LGBTQ+ conference. While male and female roles are maintained in the concept of gender within a tribe and within two spirits themselves, tribes of Turtle Island are recorded with having had up to 15 different gender identities. That is a totally different complex than what we're dealing with now, living in a westernized society where you only have the option to be male or to be female, and usually we're told that before we even get the chance to feel into who we are, the same way that we're told what our name is. Whereas in culture, many Native people, especially in the Lenape tribe, will gather names as they grow. So part of this particular custom is really a self-discovery process. If one person is identifying differently from the standard of male and female, which are still relevant and identities, and we can boil down to biology if we want to. When that expression broadens, it's seen as a form of evolution. It's seen as a gift that Creator gives to us. And what we do with that gift is we must uplift it and understand what that gift is trying to share with us. So, we are gender and sexual minorities, transgender, intersex, and non-binary people who occupy cultural and ceremonial capabilities. What I mean by this is that when somebody is seen as indigiqueer or two-spirit in culture, it's not the same as, oh, hi, nice to meet you, I'm Enx, I'm a guy. It is a sense of essence, it is a sense of duty, because it is not only how somebody feels about themselves. When we're talking about two-spirit, we are talking about the way that somebody shows up to help elevate the people in their nation around them. The way that somebody has a particular kind of medicine to bring to the table. Somebody then is given the opportunity to be the bridge between men and women, is given the opportunity to be the translator between medicine societies. So you can see various different nations that have specialties two spirits will fall into. It's not the same as, if you find yourself in many of the modern LGBTQ communities. It can be a little bit cliquey. It can be very focused on, well, here's the badge that I wear. But that's not really what we're talking about here. If there is a specialty that a tribe has for a two-spirit, it's normally something like, okay, well, you run the lodge, that is a sacred honor, or you are the pipe carrier, that is a sacred honor, or you are the regalia artist, that is a sacred honor. So it is never divorced from having some kind of interpersonal change, creation, or service even. And that being said, I decided to write this book, Two Spirit Traditions, Turtle Island's Untold Intertribal Arts, because all of these customs, all of these ways of life have really been swept under the rug, is a nice way of putting it. And I'm talking for centuries, especially, here in Pennsylvania, we are in a space where first contact was right around the corner from us. Think about Pennsylvania, think about the treaties with William Penn and how his sons handled that after. Think about New York City. Manhattan was once Mannahatta. Philadelphia was once Shakamakon, which is the place where chiefs are made. So going back all that way and having been interfered with, no wonder there are no reservations here. No wonder there's no recognition here, because compared to out west, it started even earlier that these things were taken from us. It started even earlier that we were punished for living the way that we lived, for even helping the people who came to our continent and decided to share space with us. Next slide. So, zooming back out a little bit, we will divulge more into this history as we go. We'll kind of pop around different ideas about what two-spirit is, different experiences, ways of translating that, and we'll also dive into some of how that has come to be and what the modern day looks like because of what has happened. So this is an image that I put up from a source I found online that has some two-spirit resources. And I think it articulates the intersectionality of what two-spirit or indigiqueer is very well. If you ask one native, are you two-spirit, or what does two-spirit mean to you, you might get a completely different answer than somebody else. And the reason for that is not because they're different things necessarily, but because they express in different ways. It's because these different crossovers of gender identity, societal role, sexual orientation, spiritual identity, they all interact with each other in various ways, and that comes through differently depending on if you are talking to somebody from one tribe or somebody from another tribe, or even generationally if you're talking to an elder two-spirit versus somebody who maybe is coming into that role and finding their way now. So gender identity is a hot topic nowadays. There's a lot of debate, there's a lot of heat, and there is also a lot of progress. So when we're talking about that, we're not necessarily talking about somebody's body themselves, but we are talking about how their heart feels, how they want to express through their skin, how their soul resonates with other people. Some people, as we know, are a little bit more feminine on that spectrum. Some people are a little bit more masculine, and some people are right in between, or they don't connect to that in the same way as others. And the reason that we have this as a key point is to kind of give a reference for how creative energy comes through people in its own unique way. Now, Westernization has its ideas of two poles of that, of masculine and feminine, but what else is in between? There's so much. There are some parents that hold both masculine and feminine roles for their children, and that is what is necessary in order to raise them. And it's a similar service that Two-Spirit people are doing to the tribe around them, to be able to facilitate that translation. One of the issues that we have in this Western world is it seems that men and women don't understand each other, and that there are gaps in wages, gaps in treatment, gaps in how people are taken seriously, or what access to resources that they can get. And that is inherently unnatural to humans existing and it taking a village and us all working together. So the concept of gender identity is not to take anything away from the existence of males and females. It is to broaden the concept where realistically there are a million different ways to experience being human. And separating gender identity from biological sex also helps give more of an integration to the literal third sex, which is intersex, because not every human being that you see is going to fall neatly within the boxes of I have this body part, so I am female, or I have this body part, so I am male. If you look into different tribal cultures, you can actually find various, even to this day, expressions of intersex, where intersex is an umbrella term. It's a category that I fall under myself, and I share that to be able to give some representation, because there are not a lot of us, but there are plenty. And the modern tribal ideologies around this today will happen when certain bloodlines or certain families seem to have an increase in the third sex identity of people. One of the hotspots, you could say, for that would be Papua New Guinea, where folks with a 5-alpha reductase deficiency and then their resulting bodies produce them as intersex are extremely common compared to the statistics elsewhere in the world. Or I believe it's in the Dominican Republic, there are also the Guevedoches who have the same deficiency, and what results in that society is then a physical third sex. So as we are now in the psychological and sometimes physical warfare of the current legislation, where transgender bodies are targeted, where many different kinds of minorities are targeted, we also are starting to see that intersex rights are being taken away. The reason I caveat into this is not only to give a scientific and a fact of life, a bit of backing to what people can really come out as in a million different ways, but it is also to give the contrast between gender identity is how you feel and your sex is how you come out. It is not just how you present, it is your genes as well as your appearance. So the nuance between those two things can get a little bit confusing sometimes. I will definitely take questions at the end if there's anything that anybody has bubbling up and is wondering. But to bring it back to gender identity, that is one of the main things that will inform elders in a tribe what a person is going through when they are on their two-spirit journey. And usually it is the elders who identify us before we even identify ourselves, and it is because of these very personal and sometimes subtle bits where somebody comes to their own ultimate definition of what their gender identity is, yes, but how do people express that differently as they're growing up? When people are brought closer to their puberty ceremonies in tribes as children, they often will be given a choice between picking up a bow or a hunting tool and an agricultural tool or a doll or some kind of sewing component. And that's one of the first tests or elders can sometimes give children, where it is based in some kind of gendered role, but the creative energy around that is what is really helping someone form their identity. And that really is so much more fluid than I think many of us really get the chance to think about in a world that pushes us to work until we can't think and work to live and live to work all at the same time. We don't really get to take a step back and think about who we are and how our heart pours out into what's around us, how our creative energy builds and cultivates the fields that we call our home. So I wanted to take a moment to dive into that a little bit, where we can segue a bit more into societal role. So once we take the time to think about what our energy is, how it comes through us, how that channels, how it affects the people around us, then we start seeing what that butterfly effect is. We start seeing, oh, okay, well, maybe if I picked up this bow, then I'm a hunter. And that might fit some kind of gendered role, but we can see that for the energy that it is, rather than having to put somebody in a permanent box with a label that they can never get rid of. Societal role can be things like ceremonialists or artists. One very good friend of mine who I love very much and miss very dearly, Prudence, once explained to me the construct of a nuclear family does not let a village be a village anymore. In a nuclear family, you have mom, you have a dad, you have maybe 2 kids. Kids go to school, they grow up, they go to work just like the parents. White picket fence, nothing else. But in the society of a village, people get to tap into that creative force in their heart in a different way, because it's not built just based off of a very compressed form of survival. It's built where what makes it sustainable is that this person and this person can do what they're good at. Somebody can be the one that fishes, somebody can be the one that runs the huts, the menstrual huts, somebody can be the one who reliably takes care of the children, and more people can be good at more than one skill. So inherently, instead of, well, the mom takes care of the kids and the dad works, the question becomes, who is good at what thing, and how can we all scratch each other's back? I think that two-spirit identities and people and our experiences are one of the best reference points for what it really means to think about that now, because it is so different than the template that we're given. We're inherently outside of the box now due to colonialization. And that being said, it can be hard to readjust societal role for us to really get back to that village mentality. But that is part of what we are here to guide and what we did in the first place. Like I said, many of us were not only ceremonialists, but that gave us space to become tribal leaders. more often than not. In some of the historical documents that I've dug through to create my book, one of the really, really important pieces of negotiations that I found was there would be entire two-spirit councils. And those councils would work with the council of elders. The clan mothers, the chiefs, they would work as teams and handle certain things that, again, maybe this council is better for this, maybe this council can cover that. And that expanded the depth of societal role that everybody in a tribe could experience. It expanded the depth of resource where if somebody needed something, there were even more people with even more specialties that knew how to translate even more kinds of polarities and differences of energy. For example, again, masculine and feminine. And it really gives a different way of being than the dispute on gender than we have now. So my hope is that some of these ways of thinking can be brought more forward in not only the LGBT community itself, but in tribal communities everywhere, in allied communities, and people who simply care, because it's something that all of us can learn from. Sexual orientation is kind of the flip side of gender identity. They're, again, not the same thing, but it's the other, buzzword that people think about when they think about queer folks in general. It's usually just focused on sexual orientation and gender identity. And while it is useful for the modern day for people as a whole that resonate with that, it is not necessarily useful when we are layering the cultural experience. So that's why we have all of these different points. But sexual orientation, long story short, it is not necessarily just your own power of creative energy and how that pours through you. It is the power of love and what you are attracted to. As we know, there are several different identities within that. People are coming up with more every day. Typically, we think of queer people under this denomination as gay and lesbian or bisexual, sometimes pansexual. But we're gonna lean away from those more universal identities in this presentation, just for the sake of really sitting with the history that most often does not get told. And finally, we have spiritual identity, which is kind of what we've been working up to with all of this explanation, with all of this talking, right? It's not just the body and the mind, it is the body, the mind, and the spirit that all work together. So gender identity is also something of the heart, but in a way, the way that we share that with people, how it's processed is a little bit more mental. I would say the same thing to a degree for societal role. We're constantly thinking about how we're going to approach each other, what it is that we need, what it is that the people that we love need, so on and so forth. And sexual orientation is a very physical thing. Even societal role, to a degree, if people are very stuck in materialism, they might see that exclusively as a physical role. But what are all of those things if they don't have a spiritual identity? What would be the societal role of a two-spirit healer who can help babies be born and can help with men's issues, who has a full range of skills to share? What is that if they have no spiritual identity to attach to it? That is exactly what we've seen happen in the current Western model of medicine, that people are pumped into a room and they have 15 minutes with a doctor, and they're not related to at all, if even listened to, and not in every case, but in the majority. The whole issue with that is there's no spiritual identity of the recovery that is happening. It is not preventative medicine. It's medicine that only responds once something goes wrong. So, if anything, if there was to even be a spiritual identity to it, it would be the spiritual identity of sickness. And that is not the business that the duty of two spirits lies within. Next slide. So this is an image that I wanted to share with you. I believe this was from Standing Rock. And it says, two spirit camp. We feel and express differently because we are blessed with two spirits. We are male and female. We are gay and transgender. It is a gift, a sacred station. So what does it mean to be male and female? Especially if you're a two-spirit who isn't necessarily intersex. Again, it is a spiritual identity of the unity within yourself where you process a little bit more than maybe somebody who's just set on one individual path. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. We wouldn't have all these different identities if they weren't organic to begin with. But that being said, somebody who might have a blend of both of those energies fits within a rainbow because it is gradient. It's not black and white. Somebody can land in any of the colors in between and bring different lessons, different pieces of wisdom from both sides of those coins. People can bring different bits of wisdom from the mother within themselves and the father within themselves. And that level of translation, it is really something once you come to terms with, two spirits are put on a path to reparent themselves. Put on a path to, in this day and age now, re-understand themselves outside of the context of just what we've been handed that doesn't really fit us anyway. And then we have all of this re-engagement to do with our original ways, which give us different definitions of male and female anyway. If you were to ask an Englishman, what makes you a man? First off, that is an incredibly hard question to answer for more people than not. Secondly, that Englishman is probably going to have a very different understanding of what it is to be a man than a Native American man does. Their sense of honor will be different. Their sense of responsibility will be different. Their sense of how they are to be within their family is different. So the wisdom of two-spirit is to really pay attention to these subtleties, because it doesn't only matter to us, it matters to our grandmothers, it matters to our children, and it does because the more that we can get in touch with this medicine, the less that we have to live in an assumptive society, the less that we have to tell people how to shape themselves and what they need to be good at, the more they can simply be themselves and be good at what they are. Next slide, please. And at this point, I would love to share a little bit more of the history, the people now, and what we're doing. One of the great ways to do that is with regalia. So regalia is not a costume, as it says. What that means is that the sacred attire that we wear, which may be our traditional daily wear, or it might be a traditionally designed piece that is used for a specific purpose, that is not the same as putting on a Batman onesie and hopping around and dancing. It is not a costume. It is not something that we put on for Halloween. It is in order for us to revisit that part of ourselves. And regalia is not specific to any one nation. It is not specific to any one type of native. It simply is our clothing, our hemsa clothing in Lenape. that being said, Two-Spirit folks get to experiment a little bit with regalia, which is awesome, and a practice that is very long-seated, but is only starting to take hold again now within more recent years and more recent acceptance. So on the left, you'll see James Makakis, who is a physician from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation, and he is dressed in what is men's traditional for his tribe. And this is an incredible person and wonderful resource. He provides gender affirming care to many of the children within his nation, and holds specific events for his folks, and is truly living the path along with his husband. He was also one of the first people that we really started seeing in media that took this seriously and stepped up and wanted to show the rest of us what it means to cross over identity as a Native man, what Two-Spirit is, and bring that into the intersection of modern Western medicine with our traditional medicines. Under it, you'll see a shawl that I was working on. I did a art installation with some folks. I believe this was Kutztown University a couple years ago. And in honor of the MMIP movement, which is the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples movement, we did some photos of regalia that got to be shared, along with a grove of red dresses, which represents all of the people that have been missing. So that shawl was created to honor those people, and among the most of anybody that experiences any kind of crime where they end up missing or sometimes killed, Native people are at the top of that list and are the least reported. And within that minority, it is usually women, girls, and Two-Spirits. It can happen to any one of us, but there's a disproportional emphasis on our folks because we're seen as vulnerable, and we're the ones who are at times even the least protected by our own. So I wanted to make sure that some of that medicine could be shared today. And then on the right, you will see a picture of two spirits from the Crow Nation. And you can read a little bit more about them in my book, but some of the beauty behind this particular partnership, we don't know if it was a romantic partnership, if they were a platonic partnership, what kind of kin they were to each other. But on the left is Oshtish, who is wearing Two-Spirit regalia. They were what the modern world would call a trans woman, but in the Crow tribe, they had their own word for it. And they were with, on the right, presumably the other magpie. They worked together as war heroes. They scouted together, and Oshtish was a skilled regalia artist as well. And one of the hard things that has been going on for our people for hundreds of years that Oshtish represents perfectly, one of their scouting journeys, they had to go out and wear essentially the closest thing that they had to men's clothes. And it wasn't because of their own people. It was because if they were found and Oshtish was discovered and it was apparent that they were Two-Spirit, they most likely would receive the most brutal treatment possible, even if it was post-mortem. So even being able to wear what feels right for us now, being able to embody our role through our regalia, that is a form of activism that cannot be understated, especially considering that we are entering a form of the Dark Ages again, and many of us have had to go into hiding once more. So, where did we go? This is one of the few plaques that you'll see. You can see Oshtish and the other magpie are up there as well. Coming out was once built in. It was built into how we raised our children. Since all children went through coming of age ceremonies and chose their own expressions of their roles. When our languages and customs were erased, so were our ways of communicating. This includes a majority of original tribal terms for genders and the emphasis on indigenous peer councils. So for Oshtish, the word was bote. And again, because they were farther out west, they had more time and more ability to prepare for the colonization that was coming, to then spread if necessary, and they had a terrible time just the same. But compared to Lenape, some of the only words that we have left are man and woman. And it's funny because Lenape is quite literally a genderless language. There is no pronoun for he, there is no pronoun for she. One could say that it's all the same, which is Nika, N-E-K-A, that is the singular they, and he and she. All of us are addressed the same. And that's part of the medicine too, where we don't have to assume, we can just be animate. We can just be who we are and see each other. Not as the flesh, but also as the spirit. So that being said, we'll go a little bit more into language as this goes on. But we'll talk a little bit more about the loss first. So who benefits from it? I think this painting from Kent Monkman at the top really illustrates some of the deeply important and disturbing snapshots to remember, which is when settlers started interacting with us and it became hostile. Among the first things to happen was they didn't quite recognize why some of us looked and acted a little bit different, which is hilarious considering they rolled up wearing, makeup and wigs. But sadly, before the plagues, before the mass genocides, before our records were burned, it was the two spirits who took it the worst, because the colonizers set their dogs on us. They didn't understand what they were looking at. To them, they didn't have to. And we were often buried face down, so our stories wouldn't be told to the people who could come after us. And that is why today we don't have these words to pass on most of the time. That it is a rare gem when we do have them to share. It is a rare gem when we do have a two-spirit in our tribe at all, or an elder to look to and ask questions. So the benefit of the loss, well, it's the victor who writes history, isn't it? Suppression is historic, systemic, and modern. It didn't start now, and it certainly hasn't ended now. To be able to continue that, systems have been introduced that are not native to us, that our people don't quite fit in, whether we're two-spirit or not. To be able to upkeep this atrocity, especially considering that, again, if some of our tribal leaders were two-spirit and taken out immediately, well, that kind of gives you a really big flashing red arrow in the first place of these are the people who carried the stories. These are the people who were able to take those stories from point A to point B and tell them to different people of the tribe in the way that they needed to hear them. And that's what creates richness in our people. Part of the attack is to take away that richness, to confuse us, and maybe if we're tricked into using the system, then we'll fall into what they think is wealth of living. But there's nothing like coming back to ourselves. So in order to do that, we need to confront what was truly lost. First Nations and Northeast Woodlands to Central American and Pacific tribal territories had oral and coded record for thousands of years of indigenous leadership. Yes, oral, coded, pictographs, there were entire codexes. Some traditions did have written languages. And where do you think they are now? We don't have them in our museums. Who knows, maybe the Vatican has some. But they're not available to our people in a continuous way. So we have to have these conversations. We have to have these rooms full and let ourselves talk about what isn't talked about. We were targeted first, even before the plagues, as our leadership was interpreted as perverse. Does that sound familiar to anybody? How many times have we heard a Native American described as a savage? Same thing applies here. You know, well, oh, if those gays are so terrible and they're doing bad things to our kids, then that speaks for all of us in a way where the unfortunate reality is that any denomination is going to have its percentage of good and bad people. But what is leveraged against us is that small fraction of the times where it goes wrong for someone, and then that speaks for every other queer person, every other two-spirit, and at times, again, even every other native savage. So it's very important, is what I'm trying to say, that we weave this all together and we don't think of our two-spirits as, oh, well, you're part of us, but you're also part of the LGBTQ community, so, you know, some of that stuff is for you over there. No, that's not the way that works with this. Because of the picture we see right here, if we go back to the origin, if we see why we needed these roles, if there was no need for these roles to exist, for these identities to exist, then they wouldn't exist. If our people didn't find some kind of spiritual richness, some kind of, you know, sustainable benefit, then, you know, survival of the fittest and natural selection wouldn't have really offered that in the first place. But instead, we have the consistency of the over 500 tribes across Turtle Island, which is the indigenous word for the United States, that consistently have a minimum of 3 genders. And later on, we find out that that's consistent with science. And when we find our tribes who we've dug deep enough and they have expressions of up to 8 and 15 different identities, we then find that they have these entire systems around what it meant to be sky woman instead of regular woman, or androgynous healer instead of non-binary, or a queer man instead of a straight man. Those are all words that we use, yes, to describe, to be able to relate to those descriptions, but the thing that was really lost underneath all of them that is particularly relevant to our culture is a different way of all of those people in the village, quite literally, interacting. All indigenous people are negatively affected by two-spirit plus repression. Evident cycles of renewal must be communal. This movement is for the sake of our health, and so we do not lose more knowledge, especially in medicine, than we have suffered already. And that's from my book, Two-Spirit Traditions, that you are more than welcome to come up and flip through while I'm here today. And please let me know if you would like one to help you figure that out. But that being said, this is truly something that we all have to do together. I think that while ally is a great concept for people who are learning sensitivity around minorities and how to show up for them, and the distinction between, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to take up the space for you, I'm going to support you. Ally articulates that well. What our culture really needs for two-spirit people is kin. It doesn't matter where you're from, but if you're here and you're on the paths that we've walked for tens of thousands of years, then we should be acting like kin in order to revitalize these customs. And another spotlight for a famous two-spirit of history is Lozen Arnde and Detest, who is on the right in this picture over here. So we have Lozen on the left. Nde was a war hero, lineage keeper, medicine person, and sibling to the often more famous Victoria. I do tell a bit of Lozen's story in my book, and one of the pieces that I love to point to them and share is not only the utter blood, sweat, and tears that Lozen and Detest put into political negotiations and the war in defense of their people. It's not only the teamwork that they embodied and the utter loyalty, it is the concept of what it is to be a blood keeper. Blood keeper is kind of, again, another band-aid term for the terms that we've lost, where it addresses people who are tasked, whether by direction or by spirit, to keep the lineage, to nurture the 7 generations that are coming after us, to really understand what it means to be who we are and carry the blood that we have, but to preserve it. Lozen had several different experiences, both energetically and in combat, that ended up giving them the title of legend amongst their people, and some of which included helping pregnant women cross rivers and assisting in the delivery of the baby alone in the middle of nowhere, leading their people through said rivers to escape capture, and even having a special ability to tell where an enemy was coming from depending on the shade of their veins. And that was an ability that they gained on a vision quest in mid-puberty or so. These are the types of things that would be really helpful in the wars that we have to fight now. And as wonderful as it would be for all of us, not just our spirit walkers, to go and ask Lozen ourselves, we really do still need to reflect and look at what we can find in books, but also look at the tracks that have been left to reflect on why these people have held such a space of importance. What made them want to step up to lead their folks out of harm's way, to help individuals when they didn't necessarily have to put these abstract to us now, but normal to them then, to put these skills to use. And Lozin, as well as Detest, found their way in and out of capture. I believe the picture on the left was taken during capture, and the picture on the right was in the days of childhood. And part of the reason that we remember them now is because while Detest lived to negotiate another conflict, Lozin did not. And this is still the case that surrounds many isolated and often misunderstood two-spirits through this day and age now. And before I sing you a song, I want to take a moment to talk about language. So you've heard me interchange a little bit with indigiqueer versus two-spirit. Indigiqueer is much more modern. It is a word that some people who occupy this role will use when the masculine and feminine together ideology doesn't exactly fit what medicine it is that they're bringing into the world. Whereas the etymology of two-spirit came from Northern Algonquin, Nis Menedawag, meaning masculine and feminine in one. In Lenape, two-spirit is Nisha Manituwak, from the term Manitou, which means spirit or energy. You can also find words connected to Manitou, Manitoun to make, and similar roots that cross over between Manitou being energy, spirit, representing our people, but at the same time it is the result. It is the life force that is putting together what it is that you're building. And these are some of the bits in language that you can look for to really feel the personality of who people are. And higher value in many Algonquian, which is the language family that Algonquin is in many Algonquian languages is placed on if the subject is animate rather than if it is gendered. As we've talked about, Naka is the singular they pronoun. And so many of us are familiar with Spanish, where an inanimate object may be written as male or female. And for some of us, that is very normal. You know, it might be what we were raised with. I was speaking Spanish very young myself. But for everybody to be able to use it, we don't quite fit into that box as we've been talking about. And I think it's really beautiful that many of these languages have reflected that it is animate first. We're not seeing someone and assigning an assumption. We are seeing each other as kin, as a being, as living, first and foremost. Oral tradition and political negotiations would adapt gender roles based on the audience and intention. Animal gods were gendered as animate, whereas sachems took brother or sister titles depending on congresses of peace or war. So one custom that I have unearthed from documentation about the early Lenape, when settlers first started interacting with us, was that there would be full-grown macho men chiefs who would come to a negotiation and identify as sister rather than brother, or to a point where language was used either way to even adopt the term queen. And we don't really see this anymore now, do we? But the personality of the tribe that's being communicated there is not necessarily, a play on that individual and that chief being transgender, but it is a respect to the fluidity of roles that each of us walks through in life. So peacekeeping, negotiations of peace rather than of war, were considered a feminine or a sisterly art form, a language in and of itself. It was not something that was owned by them, but something that was stewarded. One thing that I like to remind people is, if you think about Philadelphia, people are always calling it the city of brotherly love, but they don't know that it's not just that. That's not the full title. It's actually the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. And that's one of the little, breadcrumbs along the trail that points us back to this different kind of thinking. Well, where if that big buff guy is a sister in this negotiation, well, he's going to go on a hunting trip in 2 days, and he's going to be with all his brothers, and he's going to be a brother there. And maybe his little sister's going to come along, but instead of basket weaving, she really likes to hunt. When she goes out on that hunt, she's going to be a brother. She's going to be a soldier with them. But when we step into these different spaces, again, that creative energy flows through us differently. So the Lenape had actually mirrored their language based off of this, to a degree where other tribes, as a bit of an insult, once they started working with the settlers, the other tribes, not the Lenape in this particular instance that I'm talking about, started calling us a nation of women, but not in the nice way, quite rudely, to speak down to us. And that's where we can kind of look back and see that infection take place, where our definitions as Native people of what men and women are began shifting. Because think about it, when colonial individuals landed on our shores and started talking to us, if they walked up to us and said, "Oh, well, you're a woman, nice to meet you," we wouldn't even know what that meant. But now, hundreds of years after that, we can even see the ways that Lenape has influenced English, and English has influenced Lenape. We've taken words from either place. We have town and city names that are still the same-ish. So what's to say that that hasn't given an impression on the rest of the way that we communicate and even have a sense of self? Pre-colonially, it was understood that when visiting another tribe, one was to learn not only their language, but the corresponding gender system. Concepts were regional and dialectically diverse, where if you go to one tribe, they'll have, again, even if you break it down to cisgender identities, they'll have a different term for man and they'll have a different term for woman, and you're expected to learn that if you want to be able to walk around and help them pick berries. It's just the same for the different terms that we have for indigenous people, such as Bote, such as Nisha Manituwak. And there are many more. There are even translations. I believe one of the Dene terms means the constantly changing one, which again brings us back to the recognition of if something is animate more than it is gendered. And with that, I would like to sing you a song. This is my Two-Spirit Vision song that came to me during some very difficult years of my life, and it is a language beyond words. So please feel free to sit back and meditate, even with your eyes open, just feel and enjoy. Thank you for listening. Next slide, please. So, if you would like to see a little bit more drumming, you can come out to some of our events, which is about to be now. Powwow season starts in about May. And we have many of our lovely, lovely people come and share music like I just did. Some of them are in this room right now. And another thing that we like to share in these event spaces is something called, as I mentioned earlier, the MMIP Memorial Grove. So again, this has to do with the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people. I'll read to you a little bit from this flyer to give you a sense of what it is and why we do it. The Grove is a traveling memorial to honor, educate, and remember our victims. Each of the dresses represent an Indigenous woman, girl, man, or Two-Spirit plus who ventured from their home and never returned. Somebody's mother, daughter, sister, brother, relative. Our dresses represent a tiny fraction. There are thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous people, or MMIP. Our objective is to give these victims, survivors, and families a voice. Please come visit the Grove, take a moment, look at these beautiful souls, remember them, then do something. We have suggestions, flyers, and plenty of info. The murder rate of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirits is 10 times higher than all other ethnicities on our own home, may I add. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women, source Centers for Disease Control. At 84.3% average, 4 out of 5 Indigenous women have experienced violence from the National Institute of Justice report. Further, 60% of Two-Spirit individuals experience physical attacks. The source is Minnesota Two-Spirit Society. If anybody would like any more resources on this, are to be pointed in the right direction if they feel called to participate and give a hand. I have plenty of flyers along with the flyers for my art collective up here. And I am happy to answer any questions, because if there is anything that I ask you take from this presentation, it is that we must spread awareness about our missing and murdered. all of us. It is that we must find a way to do something. We must be talking to our relatives who are still here with us about this, because it is the only way to actually have any success stories, to bring some people back. It is the only way if we band together and to prevent it from happening. So I ask you to carry this forward with you, even if just in thought, because that can be the seed for hopefully along the lines we will have these statistics drop. And another project of rehabbing the awareness and richness of our people's ways that has been on the horizon. You may have noticed if you visited the cultural center next door, and it is the ethnobotany series that one of our clan mothers has been cultivating, so we can have actual reference material of not only the medicinal plants that we've used. This is the herbs and flowers. We also have trees and others in the second edition. We want to not only have what these herbs are in English, but what they do and what the Lenape name for them is and what other tribes might have used them. So we have, thankfully, even more physical references that are beginning to update and reinstate these bodies of knowledge that we have once had. If you are interested in learning about queer studies or the way that ritualism and leadership lines up with LGBTQ identities around the world and the different cultures that are associated with that, I have another book called Non-Binary Healing Practices that you can find on the Art Collective website, sacredcanvas.org. The reason that I bring this here is because I do want to make sure that people walk away from this knowing it is not just our culture that has had these understandings. We do not own this. It is simply a force of nature that comes through. We're learning how to navigate with, again, in a very heightened political field, and after all of these distortions have taken over our ways of relating to each other and thinking about ourselves. So if you yourself or if someone that you know wants to explore how something similar to Two-Spirit might be within their own ancestry, then I would definitely recommend taking a look at non-binary healing practices. And with that, I want to share with you a little bit more art. So this is Pinar Ates of Queer Nature, who is somebody that I reference in my material quite a bit. Pinar also does presentations like I'm sharing right now, and has a project, Queer Nature, with their spouse that focuses on more of the hunting, tracking, paying respects to life, and survival skills aspect of medicinal practices that we are now rebuilding. Being able to see that not only from an Indigenous lens, but a queer lens can really give some context for what Two-Spirit medicine is in practice and how we can utilize that in very practical ways. So I wanted to give them a shout out. And Two Spirits of Pennsylvania is, again, the space for Two Spirits who happen to be here and traverse through the area. So if anybody would like to get involved, we're always taking art submissions and are welcoming people with open arms. And if you have any more questions, you can find me at sacredcanvas.org. This is where I have my publishing house that I print my books out of. It's also where I keep a plethora of resources and training. Some of the MMIP work and anti-abuse support systems that I've worked with for the last couple of years can be found there, as well as things like the art and regalia that we make, the crafts that sustain our lives and are an absolute honor to share. So if you'd like to see me again, if you'd like to poke around at some of the things that we make, you can find it here. And I'll open up the floor for any questions. Feel free to raise your hand if there's anything that you're wondering.
Yeah, I was wondering on how it is a topic in this region, because right now I heard that from the government it's pretty hard to bring up native topics. From what we heard, because we came to America from Germany and we heard about the situation. But in Pennsylvania, are there other possibilities to talk or to bring that topic of Lenape and two-spirits more to public?
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question? He's asking whether there are other opportunities in Pennsylvania to bring up topics around Lenape, because you don't hear it very much. And you said the government seems to not encourage
the topics are not very much discussed already.
Lenape topics are not discussed very much. Are there other ways?
No,
By the way, Aaron is visiting from Germany.
Yes, we got to meet. So that is a question with a couple different arms in a couple different places. So to begin with, obviously, yes, the government is a lot more aggressive about minorities of various forms than it has been, or at least more outwardly, I should say. So we have been working, and by we I mean the Lenape, we have been working on state recognition for quite a few decades now. We are not exactly sure where that is going to go, because Pennsylvania does not actually recognize any of its indigenous tribes oh so kindly, but we have started coordinating with some government officials and getting the word out a bit more. That is one end of actually seeing this come to light, because now we're also seeing that this legislation has taken down specific words on their websites. Like, many government sites have been flagged for using terms such as inclusivity or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or even the term woman or transgender. These are actively being more targeted to even talk about, as you were implying. And I'm finding that the safest spaces to have these kinds of discussions are within and around the communities ourselves, or if people are outside of that, to kind of point back inward and direct each other by word of mouth. Hey, we have this gathering here, hey, we have this talk going on here, and to really just include the people that we're with and that we care about in those discourses. So we do have a petition up for recognition, and again, that's state recognition, so it is essentially a step below federal. It's a step below the whole country recognizing the tribe, despite us having been here since time immemorial and having all the paperwork to tell you so. We have that going. We also have events all through the summer season and into the fall. And that's where we can really start to develop these relationships, where it is much safer to have these conversations. To a degree, it's going to take putting ourselves out there, To a degree, it's going to take making ourselves uncomfortable. I am not exactly a big fan of public speaking, but here I am, because that's what we need to be doing. So I definitely encourage people to come out to these events and keep asking that same question, because I'm going to, point you in one way, and the people around me might have more projects or volunteer work, then they need to further that cause itself. So one of those things I think is probably the most powerful that our tribe does is every 4 years we go on a river journey for 3 weeks down the Delaware River, which is right over here. And we invite the public, we sign non-legally binding treaties, essentially having the people and the partnerships that we work with agree to support each other. And those are some of the most concrete connections I have found to be making the most progress in terms of rallying folks and having those conversations and giving some kind of effective resistance to the way that the government is now treating us. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. And you had a question too?
Yeah, I had a question that is related to this one. I'm also from Germany, and I was wondering, like we went to on March 31st, we went to the raising of the trans flag at the City Hall in Philadelphia, and there the mayor also addressed that like they were, or like everyone was standing on Lenape land.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, because I heard about this, about like representatives addressing this, but I was wondering if this is more like, if it's, I don't know, real recognition or if it's more performative for
That is a
Lenape.
great question. Thank you.
So again, the question was that the mayor recognized that it was Lenape land at the trans flag raising in Philadelphia, and here Marie is asking, is this performative rather than real recognition?
Yeah, I would say that is very, very, very situational. The practice of land acknowledgement is something that has become more popular, especially in recent years. The purpose of it is to, yes, point back to whose land we are on, and that existence goes back much farther than the current construct and the current system that is there. I mean, most of the time when you see a politician, it's not always going to be the most genuine of, discourse, but I was not there, so I can't give you my own personal read. Though I will say, people kind of have to get it wrong before they get it right in the timeline of reintegration. Whether it be, the community around us, or it be an individual worker for the government, or your best friend. If it's something new, people are going to have to experiment with it a little bit for it to end up not only being genuine, but being effective. And I think that the land acknowledgement idea is a really good start. But again, it's only a start. I've been part of certain, groups and projects where they took it upon themselves to do land acknowledgements, and they were really beautiful, and different people from the collective would take the responsibility of doing a land acknowledgement depending on what meeting, so everybody got a turn. And I think that was a really good growth opportunity for people. I think it got folks to get out of their comfort zones a little bit. I think it is pretty uncomfortable for most folks who are not directly affected by that colonialism to then address it. So it is a form of progress, and at the same time, just because that is a form of progress doesn't mean that there is automatically something else that is paired with it to make that progress last. And when you see that other sustainable marker, which you'll know it when you see it, people will back their words up with action. There was a doctor who I spoke with, I think last month, who I didn't go to him with anything Native related, but we kind of ended up talking, and in his work, he ended up not just giving acknowledgement, but literally giving back land to the indigenous nation for where he was at and cultivating a relationship with them. Obviously not every last person, especially in this economy, is going to be able to be like, hey, I would love for y'all to have your land back. Here's a couple 100 acres. But if it is a larger organization like that, or if it is a government official, like there are things that are in their power where you can pay attention to their actions to really discern whether or not it's genuine or performative. And hopefully the minority of the people that really do mean it and are really putting the work behind it can set that standard for the rest. Yeah, of course. Are there any other questions? Or any other thoughts? I'm happy to hear even just experiences people have had in general or as we've been sitting here.
Just thank you for doing this. It's really meaningful. It's nice to like do my own research and then hear someone who's been, learning it and like doing this and like, I grew up in a system that, as you know, you already know. But it's like it's nice to like hear the words echo in the back of your head that where they've been all along.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear that in physical reality. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course.
If I could, I'll also thank you. I spent the last 5 years doing studying native root work and spiritual healing, and I just want to thank you for actually just bring it to life for other people. I can tell you've done work on yourself. It's the only way you can help other people.
And you're great at public speaking. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to do more.
Yeah, sometimes we're good at the things we don't want to be good at.
Right.
I do it for creator, not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So please keep doing it.
of course.
I actually do have a question, and it relates to the concept of the cultural or social containers that are missing
Mm-hmm.
in our Western colonial culture for the diversity of gender and expression of gender. And the thing that really struck me about what you were describing was the fact that it was something that it wasn't just, let's see if I can put this in the right way. It wasn't just, oh, gender is a social construct,
Mm-hmm.
nor was it, oh, gender is something that comes from the archetypal, space and like just has to, push itself forward. It was more like an opportunity of recognition, of sacralizing, and of understanding the nature of the individual and their relationship to the society as being a holistic process
Mm-hmm.
that requires freedom, but also the containment of the group. And I'm just curious, how can we learn from that today, and how can we apply that to things like bathroom laws or schools? Because it seems what we're losing is that sense that this is a conversation. It becomes an argument about power rather than recognition or understanding or listening.
Thank you for that question. Because that really gets down to the nuts and bolts of it. How can we bring these teachings into the very, often materialistic issues that we have around freedom and our rights now? My lovely partner in the back and I have a lot of conversations about this kind of thing. And something that I bring up to people is, like what you said, it's an exploration of the self, but it's not, the goal of it is not to get your brownie points and be the village shaman. It's not to be able to wave your flag out of ego. It's not to be able to say, I am this. It's to be able to say, well, I am having an experience and this is what I'm contributing. It is the ability to understand ourselves so well that we can then bring the best of that to the collective. So we are actually in practice being oneness. It's not just a concept anymore when we're living it like that. And the way that things have gotten so twisted with colonialism and, you know, be you a Native person or be you a white person, I think to a degree all of us struggle to deal with the weight of that baggage, with the systems that it's cornered us into. It's not easy to just be like, oh, well, you know, let's practice some oneness. And one of the examples that my partner and I have talked about is, well, it's really a heated debate now, and increasingly so. Well, what if there are transgender people in the Army? Some people are being asked to leave, but is it really a weakness to have more kinds of people be your warriors? No, it isn't, because it gives you more perspectives to then achieve the thing that you want to achieve with more people at the table that are giving you ideas and giving you forms of execution that are based in reality, that are based in what they've seen and heard and done, that will carry that vision forward. So, you know, forming regulations around that is the really hard thing, and the legislation that we have now, instead of leaning into the progress, is leaning away from the progress. So we are finding that bathrooms are getting more policed instead of having more safe places for people to pee. That gives up even more issues of, well, people being biased against trans people is also dangerous for your regular woman, because then, oh, well, if you don't look like a woman, why are you in this bathroom, starts coming up, then regular women who are just using the bathroom are going to be targeted depending on how they look, if they don't fit a specific beauty standard. So in the Army example, something like that, you know, you can't just go and think about changing the bathrooms at every fort in America. You can't automatically go and reestablish that overnight. It's just not realistic. It would take an absurd amount of funding to have, instead of just one bathroom or two bathrooms where everybody does all their business all together, that there would be a third restroom or a singular stall. That is more than they would be willing to give, and we have to be realistic about that. If we want to actually change the system, we have to stay true with who we are, but we also have to recognize the system for how it thinks and what it wants to accomplish. Well, if the desire is to make it effective, then we can't just make some big, massive ask that's only going to get shot down because of the money. Again, the motive. So the solution here, well, we take it back to the training. What if in basic training, people are told, you know, here is what we open our doors to. These are the regulations about it. If you don't like it, get out. Because if the T-guy soldier that was lacy 15 years ago is the guy that's actually really good at his job because he had to try harder than everybody else, he should still be in that training. And it's a lot more difficult with examples like this because militarized forms of organization are so much more rigid than the already rigid bureaucracy that exists. which is why I bring it up as an example. You kind of have to think of the long term and the short term. Long term, it would be great to have places where everybody can go to the bathroom and be safe, where everybody can make it up the ranks and, like the village, do what they are good at to the best of their ability and be supported without being interfered. But how do we get there?
Well, one of the things that occurs to me, you were talking about the brothers and sisters, you know, we got brother bathrooms and sister bathrooms, you know? But ultimately, it's an honor system. Nobody can ever constantly police these spaces.
Yeah.
The use of these spaces is an honor system, and it's an honor to enter them. And if we could go back to the concept of honor and self-control rather than being controlled, then we have a basis for a society where people are free. And this is, I think, a big part of America's like psychosis.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and that's part of why I give the example of soldiers, because the whole premise of that is supposed to be honor. So short-term solution, if you go into basic training and you're essentially told this is how we run things, you know, you can have your hair this way or this way. Luckily, in terms of culture stuff, Native American men actually just were given more freedom to wear their hair long and braided. So if there are situations like that, you know, again, it's not really about being an individual. It is about optimizing our regulations so we can get the best out of the most contributors. And that would take a lot of discourse, but ultimately, if what people need in executing that honor is a set of rules, is a set of guidelines, then those are discussions that can be had. Again, it won't change overnight, but these are the steps that we can start to think about. These are the things that we can, you know, ask our policymakers, because we are not as far removed from that control as we are led to believe that we are. And yeah, as you said, nobody should be constantly policing basic human rights. And that's what it all comes back to. That's what it comes back to in the sense of recognizing animate over gendered, recognizing the autonomy of another spirit, of another person, of another inhabitant of this earth to do their job. It should be first and foremost. And the more that people can, you know, kind of recalibrate their thinking. So I think a lot of the issue around creating new policies that can be inclusive and effective and work for everybody without making some other kind of ecosystem imbalance is that people are really, really focused on the end result. They're focused on how it's going to turn out. They're focused on exceptions to the rule instead of why something works, what makes something work. Again, if we think about how the few times that often false flag things happen and queer people are painted to be savages. Well, that's the exception to the rule. That's the 1%. That doesn't mean that the 99% then need to have their entire reality shifted, because there are other more sustainable preventative measures that we can work into a system that will then last us longer. So, you know, without getting too into the nitty gritty of that, that's mostly how I feel about it. You know, if you sat me down at the drawing board, I'm sure I could write up some whole proposal for somewhere. But alas, we're in a bookstore, you know, not in the war room.
Well, they do say that poets litigate the culture of every society, whether people recognize it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's poetry that survives. most economic collapses followed by societal collapses. It's poetry that, you know, people put their hand on their heart and stand for the flag for. So here's to more of that.
Thank you for bringing your poetry to us.
Thank you too. Oh, you ain't heard nothing yet. Yeah, Wanishi, I am grateful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.